the public school system is not.
I had like identity crisis of, well, I'm an athlete, but I'm also pretty smart, but I also want to be in the cool group.
They had multiple sniper towers at every 100 yards to get to their house.
The second you're aware of it and you don't do anything about it, or you don't work through it, or you recognizing you're having these emotional breakdowns or outbursts or whatever, that it's really a sign of immaturity.
It's a lot easier to turn anger into justification because
I think it's the single most important thing is to be able to express your emotions, to be able to talk about your sadness so it doesn't turn into...
I'm going to let these things flow right now. I'm going to use it as fuel. I'm not going to attach to these emotions. I'm going to enjoy the feeling of I want to fucking crush this person right now.
This system is so set up for capitalism that you have to go private, you have to pay for it. Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to today's episode of the Logan and Faiez Show.
Today we're talking about building the gap between reaction and response as it relates to parenthood, marriage, business relationship, and expanding our awareness around emotional intelligence. So let's jump into it.
Cool, man. You know, I was thinking actually, we're like so lucky that our Atlas's daycare / school, his class is like incredible. The kids in it and all the parents, like how easily we get along with everybody and how good the kids, in fact, are so good that when they moved up from their age group, whatever it was, up until 2 years old to then the next class, the teachers went with them. Teachers were like, yeah, we're just going to continue on with this group of kids. We don't want to stay back here.
Y'all are really like intentionally, proactively looking for their next stages of school, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, luckily the daycare that he's at, the school that he's at, it feeds into potentially the private school that we're going to send him to.
That's K through 12?
Yes, I believe it's K through 12.
Because like what I found is almost like pre-fifth grade, there's actually a lot of great options.
There is.
Consider like Montessori and all the varieties.
Yeah.
But then once you get into like 6th through 12th grade, you know, there becomes the standardization requirements to eventually feed into the path of college.
Right.
And I've always wondered, why isn't there, for lack of a better example, a Montessori that goes 6th through 12th grade?
I think for that reason, I know in our case, for example, it gets dicey if Atlas wants to participate in sports. Like he almost has to go to a public school. There's not a ton of private school athletic options.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. So it's just kind of the way it is.
I think early stage education, there's a lot of really high quality options. But as the kids get older, the quality of options just goes down.
I mean, welcome to America.
It sucks.
Yeah, it's terrible.
It really needs to change. But I think it's actually, I was talking to Heather about it this morning. I think our generation of parents are much more open to the idea that the public school system is not amazing.
No.
A lot of people are dissatisfied with it and are open to alternative options. And you see those popping up. Whereas our parents' generation thought that whatever school did was right.
Exactly.
And if you challenge that, it was you were the problem as the kid.
Yeah.
But I think our generation of parents are much more open to the idea that the institution is the problem. The system is set up for like a bygone era of industrial revolution, factory workers.
Yeah, it's an old paradigm.
It's an old paradigm.
Yeah.
So I'm very eager to see if we can create something new. I don't know that it happens within the public school system, but outside of it.
I think it's really hard at this point. This system is so set up for capitalism that you have to go private, you have to pay for it.
Find a good option, you have to go private at this point.
Yeah.
But actually to that point, what is the job of the public school system? Like what?
Babysitters at this point?
At this point, it's babysitting.
I mean,
right?
that's how it started. That's what it was essentially for.
Well, initially the objective was to create quality factory workers, 9 to 5, people that could follow rules, to follow the same process and procedure over and over again.
And for those parents that were already in the 9 to 5 factory workers, their kids had somewhere to go.
And now, if the outcome is supposed to be to produce a quality worker or contributor to society, is the public school system effectively doing that?
Don't get me wrong. I think there's still decent ones littered throughout the country and teachers that still care.
Areas
But
with high
until we
property
decide
tax.
to pay our teachers more and allocate more money to that, it's not going to get any better.
Those are the areas with high property tax have better schools.
Yeah. Out here in not out here. I'm not at home, but in Dripping Springs, the public school system's actually not that bad.
Because
But
you
I'm
guys have
still
expensive homes.
I'm still suspect to sending our kids to public schools because unfortunately you just don't know who they're going to end up friends with and in contact with and
So who they're interacting with.
who they're interacting with
control
and who they're
for it, yeah.
influenced by. I want to believe that our kids are going to be self-aware enough that they're going to know an emotional intelligence that steers them in the right direction. I want to believe that, but also I don't know. I don't know. So it's really the one thing in my life now that it's hard to not be attached to the idea of making sure my kids interact with other very well-rounded kids.
Yeah, I feel so bad for my parents because we went to what was supposed to be an amazing school, public school. And however, when I went into 9th grade, that was the year that my really good public high school got, I guess there was a circuit in our district where all of the kids that would get expelled in previous years, they would put into a certain high school, and those would rotate every couple of years. And it just so happened that when I entered 9th grade, we got all of the kids that would get all the bad kids. And guess who I gravitated towards?
Oh, yeah.
All the bad kids.
Oh, yeah.
And so I would be like bringing these kids around my parents, roughly, like they would see. And I could just imagine. I feel so bad for them. Like,
because they just know, they see
can't
it.
do
like
anything
now
about
that
it.
I'm that age, I'm like, oh yeah, I see what my parents were trying to do and who they wanted me to hang out with and not hang out with, and
they were right.
they were totally right. Yeah.
They were right.
Meanwhile, I'm in high school just wanting to be accepted so bad by every group that it was just, and I had like identity crisis of, well, I'm an athlete, but I'm also pretty smart. But I also want to be in the cool group, kind of getting into trouble, kind of like pulled in every direction.
Exactly.
And now I just think about that with Atlas. I'm like, God, Atlas, I hope you're just smarter than your dad.
So I did go to private school for a couple of years. I don't know. Did you know that I went to 10th through 12th grade in India? Did I ever tell you that?
No, I don't think so.
My dad's job took him overseas, and instead of traveling back and forth, he decided to move us. Also, as a result of I was getting in massive amounts of trouble, and he was like, "I got to pull him out of this environment."
How'd you feel about that when you went?
I was pissed. I had a girlfriend, like a lot. I think we were.
Did they give you a heads up, or was it just sort of a last minute, like, "Hey, we're going to do this, by the way"?
I don't really remember, but whatever it was enough to piss me right off all the way through for like 6 solid months. I was straight until I found a new girlfriend, and then I was good. That experience changed my life because we had to go to a private school. All the public schools in New Delhi, the capital, were in another language. So we had to go to like a British school. And the only kids that went there were either foreign like us from other countries or the extremely wealthy elite locals.
Yeah.
And by extremely wealthy elite, I mean people that were worth tens of millions to hundreds of millions to billionaires.
I always like to say they're wealthy, not rich.
Wealthy.
Yeah.
Wealthy. There's like 2 examples that come to mind. The largest import exporter of rice in India and the largest light bulb manufacturer of India. These are like boring as hell. But when you think about the number of light bulbs in India
and the amount of rice in India,
a lot of money. We went to go get tutored at one of these kids, and they had multiple sniper towers at every 100 yards to get to their house.
Oh my gosh.
That's how wealthy they were.
Wow.
And it opened my mind at an early age to what was possible, because when I lived in the States, we lived in a regular middle class neighborhood, and the richest people in our city might have been doctors and lawyers and things of that nature, but not like business magnates. That forever changed my mind. But my point, coming back to the private school, is private school kids get into a lot of trouble too.
It's all around. You can't avoid it.
Instead of like low grade drugs, it's high grade drugs.
Great. Thanks, Faiez. That's what I have to think about now with Atlas. I don't think he's gonna get into that though. He's too pure. I'm keeping him pure. I'm keeping him away from the riffraff.
I believe that good parenting, from what I've seen with my friends, is that it can come around. It comes back around.
Yeah.
There are certainly kids that just go straight through and never get in trouble. That was never me, but I did end up going all the way out. And then I realized why my dad was or mom was so right about so many things. And I came all the way back in real tight and crisp.
Yeah.
So maybe Atlas will go straight through, cut through the noise.
I think he will. I think both of our kids will. I really do.
I see it more for I barely know them, but I feel like Noble will go straight through. She'll be like, this isn't for me. And Atlas could be like, I'm going to rage on the world, baby.
Honestly, it might be Noble that rages on the world. She's a little sassy, feisty one. Her personality is really coming out now.
That's so funny.
It's so funny. Like she's just she beckons now, so she'll just be like, and I'm like, oh, okay, all right. Guess I'm doing what you say.
Yes, Your Majesty.
I know.
Of course, I'll do what you say.
Of course. Like that's my life now. Do what my daughter says.
Yeah, my pleasure.
So, anyway,
I wanted to talk about a competitive spirit, and then you were talking about how to hold space and sort of be available at home.
right.
And on the surface, I think they're separate topics, but actually, as I thought about it, they're extremely related.
Mm-hmm.
And especially when it comes to the point of like the moment in time is when I get home from work and I'm going to transition to go into the home space. If I don't pause and switch my energy and I bring that aggressive, like workplace, have to achieve goals. Are we on track? Why didn't this happen? How are we going to get there? Energy into the home, it fucking ruins everything.
100%.
And so if I can essentially switch my hats, you know, it's the classic meme of I shared my problems with my husband and he gave me the solution, but like that's not what I needed from him. I just needed him to listen.
Right.
So yeah, like how are you navigating that these days?
I kind of have to do the same. I mean, not kind of. I have to do the same thing. The moment where I always, from the garage door that enters into the house that goes to our mudroom, that's like my barrier where I'm like, okay, it's family time. It's dad time. It's understanding my emotional balance going into that. I think over time, because I was very emotionally dysregulated, I would say up until 35, 38. I mean, even more recently in the last couple of years, because once you have kids, it's a whole new layer of understanding emotional regulation. Definitely still had some moments, but I would say now, finally at 42, I have a much better grasp and understanding and self-awareness of where I want my emotions to maintain at all times. And a big part of that is the second I walk through the house, it's being incredibly self-aware of what I am potentially projecting onto my kids. I think once you have kids, at least in my experience, we've talked about this before, they're sponges and they're going to pick up everything. And knowing that, of course, we're not perfect. Of course, me and Casey aren't perfect. I understand all parents aren't perfect. And this is not a knock on any parent that has emotional breakdowns or anything, because it happens. But I think if the second you're aware of it and you don't do anything about it, or you don't work through it, or you recognizing you're having these emotional breakdowns or outbursts or whatever, that it's really a sign of immaturity. Once I recognize that about myself, not so much as like, oh, well, this is just how I express my emotions, or it's validation that I should be upset at this, or whatever you want to fucking call it. Once I recognized simply it was just being a little baby and being immature, I was like, okay, this has to change, because this is not what I want my kids to witness ever.
Do you think that part of the lesson to your kids, like what they're observing and absorbing, is how my dad responds and recovers when he acts out? For example, we talked about the toxic masculine school, right? The alpha school in another episode. And so, you know, there's teaching your kids that having a breakdown is bad. We don't have breakdowns. Or when I have a breakdown, it's justified, versus like, that's not how I would have liked to act in that moment. I apologize. Like, this is how I would have preferred to show up. And you're teaching them how to.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, we're not perfect and everybody's going to have their moments of breakdowns. But I do also believe that not having those breakdowns or not showing that isn't a sign of like, oh, I don't want my kids to see that I do have these moments of breaking down, or I'm trying to hide it from them. I just think it truly is a higher sign of intelligence, maturity, consciousness, when you can be aware that you're having one of those potential moments of a meltdown or a breakdown, but instead of physically, emotionally expressing it, I can actually just go into a calm, centered place of going to my wife or whatever need be, talk about what's going on and figure it out and then move forward from it. Yes, there is I'm going to sweep my emotions under the rug and not process this and not go through it or not have this breakdown or think that it's a sign of weakness or whatever. That's not what I feel about that at all. I just think if you can have that pause between reactivity and response, that my kids will see less reactivity and more of just a normal response to a situation that might be emotional or stressful.
It's both, because I mean, I don't know that I've ever met anybody that never acted out of character. Right?
Yeah.
Because
we're human.
Everybody's human, right? So in part, it's an aspirational goal, right? To always have a gap, a pause between reaction and response. And I think you can reduce if everything is a spectrum, our show should be called The Spectrum. And, there are people that are always living in reaction.
Yeah.
And then the ideal is to be, perfectly centered, and I only respond in a reasonably balanced way every
Basically
time.
the Dalai Lama.
The Dalai Lama, right? I think you can trend as close to this side of the spectrum as you can, but there will always be that bit of humanity.
Yeah.
And there's somewhere on this spectrum that kind of becomes an unsafe environment for a kid because they're absorbing everything, right? And if you're too far on the reactive side of things, then the kid absorbs that as trauma, and that comes out later in life. But if you can stay on this theoretical other side towards the responsive, then there's enough of a safe environment for that to be what the child is absorbing. And when there is reaction, for it to be an education moment versus, oh shit, it's happening again. And they go into whatever their learned trauma response is.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't have kids, but I have to do that that is what we have to practice in our marriage constantly, right? Like a few episodes ago, I shared with you how I stayed in resentment with Heather for like 5 days straight over something ridiculous. And so, but for relationships, you also have to practice going from reaction into response as quickly as you can.
Yeah.
And for me, if I'm naturally somebody with a reactive nature, which is true in some ways and not true in others, the way to practice getting to this side of the spectrum is to own your mistakes when they happen. Because when I brush things under the rug or justify my reaction, then there's no internal reason for me to learn a new behavior.
Exactly.
In fact, the power of the owning your mistake, taking accountability, apologizing, is that it sucks. And I don't want to have to apologize again. And then my body thinks the next time, hold on, don't say this, because
you're going to have to apologize.
You're going to have to apologize because that's the thing that you do.
Yeah.
So why don't you just hold back in this moment instead?
Yeah.
And so I'd say I'm remarkably better at it.
I am too. It's taken me a long time.
Yeah.
I had a lot of, I had to move past a lot of programming and behaviors that I had from childhood and things like that, and stuff that, like just understanding how to express my emotions better verbally as opposed to physically expressing them. My biggest thing for the longest time was my sadness was expressed as anger because I didn't know how to express sadness.
100%.
I didn't know how to talk about it, that I was not feeling great or feeling sad or feeling down.
That's huge.
It just came out as anger.
That's huge.
As a protective measure.
I only learned that within the last few years. One of my mentors, I was sharing about how my anger comes about my anger. He said, why do you, ask me, like, why do you feel angry? And he revealed to me that underneath the anger is sadness. And I was like, holy shit, that's so interesting. That is true. And instead of allowing myself to feel sad, it would come out in, like you said, a physical anger. I don't know how many broken windows, car doors, house doors, holes in the wall that over the course of the first 25 years of my life that I was responsible for.
Yeah.
And I had to really learn. I mean, that's why I coped in large part with drugs and alcohol.
Same.
Like I didn't know what to do with those emotions that made me feel weak, less than, not good enough, pissed off, resentful. And so I would get high or get drunk.
Yeah. And I was even completely oblivious to it. So it's like I was coping and not even knowing that I was coping, like knowing that was a thing until you finally get out of it and you do some work. And then I'm like, oh, that's why I always wanted to feel that way, high and drunk and happy and good, because that meant I didn't have to sit with these sad feelings.
It's the same thing with, not everybody is had as extreme manifestations as I did, which, you know, my wife was able to see. The outside world really couldn't see as much, but it reveals itself in really small ways, like stress eating. I know for sure come Friday night, my body from the stress of the week is like, what is the fun thing that we're going to eat to like feel good right now? And I can see myself having that response, that reaction every single week, unless I'm in a habitual cycle of not doing that. But that's hard. It shows up. That's what cigarettes, the impulse to smoke a cigarette or a vape is about, or reach for caffeine constantly, all kinds of things. Yeah. And so sitting with sadness as a guy, I think I think it's
one of the hardest things to do, because we're taught so much, especially in our generation. Now, I obviously think the paradigm has shifted to where boys, share your feelings. It's okay. It's safe. It's not a sign of weakness. I think it's definitely happening more. At least I'm seeing it with parents and the algorithm that I see coming up. I obviously know there's still parts of the world and parts of America that's not happening.
Totally.
But I think that's one of the biggest key contributing factors to boys, unfortunately, not becoming men as they get older. I think it's the single most important thing, is to be able to express your emotions, to be able to talk about your sadness so it doesn't turn into anger. The thing that I would want most for men, and maybe that's what I want most to get for men to get out of this, is that it's totally fine to talk about your feelings. Just don't like wallow in them, you know, figure out what's going on, take a hard look at yourself, figure out why you're angry. It's not that it's bad to have upset or angry feelings. Again, we're having a human experience. That's an emotion that we're going to have. But do you properly process it, go through it, express it, and then the biggest thing, like, let it go? And that's what I was so terrible at, is like actually letting it go. Like, I could sit there and go, oh, I'm so sorry for getting upset, or I'm sorry for getting angry. But then I would replay that in my head for weeks, months, maybe even years sometimes, of just this justification of my actions. Like we talked about, justification of being angry, upset. Oh, this person did this or they did that. The principle of it, whatever. I'm writing them off, yada, yada, you know, whatever laundry list of excuses you want to make. And then recognizing 2 years down the road, like, I'm still sitting in that same energy. And I think that's what I would love to see in more men, is just actually taking a moment to be like, why did I get so upset about that? Or why was I so angry about that? Having that self-awareness. Maybe it's not anger. Maybe it's sadness, like we talked about, you know?
I think properly learning to express it was a big part for me. And it's a lot easier to turn anger into justification, because it's believing that you're right for feeling that self-righteousness. That feels like a position of strength.
Right.
And that's what I think most people, that's a default reaction when you are feeling defensive about something. I mean, defensive, you're rationalizing why you feel heated in the moment about it. And learning to see, when I feel that, I've talked about it over and over again, I have to write it out. What am I feeling? What happened that triggered that feeling, which is how I get to why I'm feeling that way. And then what was my part in it? And now my brain, I have to do that. If I don't do that every time or as often as that happens, then I will find myself back in the place of justifying my negative emotions. Yeah. Like, that is the purpose. That is the act of tending to the garden for me. Yeah. Right? Keeping the weeds at bay is me when I get like this about something, I got to write it down and look at it for what it is. And also, I love fueling a good workout with my negative emotions. I allow myself while I'm working out. And I know, I'm like, I'm going to let these things flow right now because I'm going to use it as fuel. I'm not going to attach to these emotions, but I'm going to enjoy the feeling of I want to fucking crush this person right now. It feels great. And then I can walk away from it and be like, I don't actually identify with that emotion, but it's in there. It's in there and it's a part of me. And also then I'll move on to like the higher parts of myself. So I use the gym as an appropriate channel to really relate and allow my negative emotions to express themselves. Like you see me in the gym.
We need to work out together.
I don't look like
sometime.
somebody you want to come talk to when I'm in the gym.
That doesn't surprise me. When did you recognize that you didn't have to identify with your emotions? What was sort of like the monumental moment for you? Were you able to just shift and like say like, okay, I can witness these emotions now. I know how to process them, or, you know, going into your journaling and things like that. Like, were there any big moments that sort of occurred, or mentors or other people that you saw that it was like, oh, that's how I need to do it. I'm being, for lack of a better word, a little bitch about it. I need to do it this way.
I mean, when I got sober, for sure, because one of the steps is writing down pages of all your fears and inventories, and then you got to go make amends for it. And that is a Herculean task that most people never get sober because they avoid those two steps.
Yeah.
It's so uncomfortable. But if you actually commit to it, you get to see all of the shit you've got kicking around in your own body and mind that you're carrying with you at all times.
Yeah.
And once this is the power of like the Catholic confession, right?
Yeah.
Like, you know, I am feeling this, and I know that this is in the Catholic faith, this is not what God wants me to feel or think like. So I got to tell you, that's extremely powerful. Mm-hmm. That is the process of letting go, right? And there's the additional stuff. If I don't do that, I will end up acting in a way where I hurt somebody else or I say something really nasty, which I have to make amends for. I never want to make amends. I literally would prefer to go the rest of my life never behaving in a way that I have to apologize for something, right? Yeah. So again, it's like the reactive versus responsiveness in parenthood. I will have to make amends. I will for sure. I kind of was considering whether I had to make one yesterday or not, and I don't think that I did because I didn't cross the line. I was able to pull back and look at my part in it before I got nasty. And if anybody's listening to this, you're relating to some portion of it. But this is where the discipline of it really comes into play. Hearing something and being like, yeah, that makes sense is one thing, but turning knowledge into practice is a completely different thing. And for me, I love this saying that there is a mechanical means to a spiritual end. A lot of people think that to have a spiritual experience, you have to be a spiritual person. But to actually have a spiritual experience, there are a mechanical series of steps that if you just stick to and go through, call them rituals, call it meditation, call it all the bucket list of spiritual, mechanical, physical steps. If you stick to them and go through them, one day you may in fact have a spiritual experience versus I need to have the spiritual experience before I can become a spiritual person. That's not how it works. That's not how it works for me. Yeah. It's like when we were talking about meditation the other day, you don't start out being able to see your thoughts. You have to sit there, 5 minutes at a time. And
as is anything else, you have to go through the uncomfortable stages of being shitty at it.
Being the rookie, being shitty at it. Yeah. Maybe the first 150 times you pray, however prayer is for you, you don't connect.
Hell, I was uncomfortable just even showing up to a community that was a spiritual community. Even just walking in that door the first few times was like the most uncomfortable thing I've ever done. But it's like what we talked about the other day of just pressing through those things that you don't want to do. And then what you get out of it on the other side is that's what you then become because you've pressed through it finally.
That's right.
So
if you're not in a habit of working out, just step foot in the gym. That's the mechanical means to a fit end. You don't start out as a fit person and then go to the gym. Just show up there, show up there, show up there.
Well, what is it you've read Atomic Habits, right? Yeah, I mean, he talks about that where it's just literally do the most babyest step. Like wake up and do one push-up that day. That's it.
So if you're all the way on this reactive, you're not going to get to, you know, I live in the gap between reaction and response.
Right.
It's honestly one moment at a time.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe out of the next 20 reactions you have, if you're 0 for 20 right now, and in the next 20, you could go 1 for 20.
That's
boom,
better.
baby.
Yeah.
That's a win.
Yeah, that is a win.
And then let's get to 2 to 20, 3
Yeah.
to 20, 4 to 20. I love, God, it's so graspable, you know, that level of progress.
I literally had a moment the other night. It was honestly like 7 o'clock hits at night. And if I was up at 5 a.m. and then get home 5 p.m., get 2 hours with the kids, by 7 o'clock, I'm like starting to get exhausted to where I can't really snap out of it. I can just kind of feel my energy dipping. One little thing might cause an emotional disruption, whatever the kids might be doing or whatever. And it's not that I like take it out on them or anything. It's just I can just notice it in myself that it's happening. And then Casey asked me a couple of questions and she was like, "Why are you so short with me?" And while yes, I was maybe shorter than normal with my answer, I caught myself in that moment being like, okay, yes, I was short. Normally in the past, her just asking me, "Why are you being short?" would then snowball into like a more emotional reaction. But instead in that moment, I was like, oh, yeah, I was short. So I just kind of looked at her and was like, yeah, I mean, I just said yes. Like I just answered your question.
Yeah.
And I think she knew also in that moment, like, oh, Logan's probably feeling a certain way, whatever. He was like, okay, he didn't elaborate on his answer. No big deal. But I reckon it was just recognizing that both of us didn't escalate to anything else. That literally like 2 minutes later, I was fine. Because then I was able to hold the gratitude for, oh, this didn't escalate to something bigger, even though I was feeling a little low energy, even though maybe I was a little short with her, but it didn't go beyond that. And just being able to like, oh, cool, that went better than it would have been a year ago.
Yeah.
Like, let's just be happy with that and move on.
Like, it just takes one little reaction before you're fighting about a thing and you're like, I don't even know what the fuck we're fighting about. I don't even know how we got here.
You're just in the
but
weeds.
I'm just fucking heated and fuck you.
Casey sees it all the time with her clients. Like they just get into the weeds of a fight and then all of a sudden you're 10 layers deep and you don't even know what the fuck you're fighting about.
Totally.
Yeah. I think that's what Casey and I we've gotten really good at. Now that we're a year and a half into 2 kids, I think we talked about this the other day. We've really found our rhythm as teammates. We understand what potentially might annoy me or what potentially might annoy her, that maybe where one of us falls short on something, we recognize like, okay, yeah, maybe she didn't do X, Y, or Z, or I didn't do X, Y, or Z, but I can pick up the slack, she can pick up the slack, or we can just not point it out to each other because we're like, hey, we're deep in this parenting thing. Who cares if this 1 or 2 things didn't happen? So I think we've really gotten to a place of just knowing the unknown with each other, or the unspoken, which just that it's like not just our self-awareness of ourselves of what might be a little triggering, but also knowing what's going to trigger your partner, being able to hold. I heard such a great thing this morning on a podcast. It was really having the compassion and empathy and understanding of other people to be able to hold multiple perspectives at once. That if me and you have an experience, that I can recognize that your perspective of the experience isn't right or wrong and my perspective isn't right or wrong. And then if we were to share it with somebody, then their outside perspective of that experience, it's just being able to hold multiple ones, I think allows you to be less emotional reactive because you're not attached to your own subjective experience or subjective perspective in that moment. And I think for me personally, that's what I've gotten better at with my relationship of like recognizing, oh, this was Casey's perspective of this situation. I can see that. I can see why maybe that upset her or that bothered her. And I just need to be better or be able to communicate better what's going on in that moment.
I find that that's easier when something is not on the line. For example, if you and Casey were deciding what school to put Atlas in, and you vehemently disagreed, those are the moments where it's hardest to be like, oh, I understand your perspective, because genuinely you may believe or feel that like your perspective is going to fuck up our child. That's the wrong choice.
Well, I don't think I'd ever think that about Casey. But I also do believe those are the moments where the biggest amount of growth and maturity comes from and wisdom comes from. Like, yeah, it's going to be the hardest if something is on the line. But like we talked about the other day, saying yes to something, swinging for the fences, and then rising to the occasion. I think it's in those moments, in those relationships where that's where the next level of your relationship can get to if you do have something big on the line and you guys are able to talk about it at a very neutral level and then see what the conclusion is going to be.
I agree with all of that except the neutral level. I actually am a huge advocate for getting passionately disagreeing while maintaining respect, and then you can within boundaries. So like, for example, Heather and I have always, not always, for the majority of our relationship been business partners. And in our first business, we had never done it before. She'd never built a business with her partner, and I'd never done the same. And learning the boundaries of being boyfriend, girlfriend, then husband and wife, and also business partners were very messy. And we employed easily over 100 people together. And when we would react to each other, and there's employees that are relying with you, and most concretely, like right there, and you guys are disagreeing, and they feel like they're about to get into the middle
of, oh no, mom and dad
are fighting. That's very sloppy. That's very bad sloppy. Form.
Yeah.
And now we're doing it again, and I've seen how much we've grown in terms of, you were talking about the unspoken communication that you and understanding that you can have with each other, but that's a result of a ton of communication. Mm-hmm. You only get to the unspoken communication through a lot of communication. And one thing that I highly, highly encourage and advocate for in the workplace is disagreeing. And that is really hard for people to do. It's very scary to disagree with your boss, and it takes the right kind of leader to foster an environment of disagreement. But I believe you only get to the best ideas if everybody shares their different perspectives.
Yeah.
And it's very easy when the boss has a strong perspective to just be like, I'm just going to go with that. But you actually completely devalue yourself as a contributor if you're not like, hey, I think you're wrong. And so, for example, I'll relate it back to my relationship, but yesterday it was just a great example. We were doing our May review, and our CEO missed his goals more than anybody else. And it would have been very easy to just, skirt past that. And I fucking laid way deep into him. He was getting red. I could see he was visibly uncomfortable. And a part of me was like, dude, if you keep going, you may not have a job. But I had to stay firm. If we can't hold everybody to the same standard, like, why did this happen? Did we set a bad goal, or was it poor execution on your part? Mm-hmm. And why are we finding out that you had too much on your plate at the end of the month versus in our Monday and Friday check-ins? Do we need to change the process in Monday or Friday? You need to understand that you have a team that is here to help you, and we can't find out that we're going to miss a goal 4 weeks into the future. We need to catch that in real time. And it's like, it's hard. That's really hard to do. And it led to a very tense conversation with everybody sharing their opinion. But because I brought the heat to that conversation, it kind of gave other people permission to share what their true thoughts on the matter were as well. And after we got up off the table, I went and met him by the water cooler, and I, dapped him up and gave him a hug. And I was like, I love you, bro. I got you. I'm here to help you. And he's like, it's all good, man. I can take it on the chin. And so that is way easier when that's not my wife. But I also have a business with my wife where she's my business partner. And when I have to give it to her on the chin, when I'm like, hey, if we want to hit these sales targets and you're having this many meetings, this ratio doesn't math out.
Yeah.
And she's like, you're making me feel this kind of way. I'm like, I am your business partner right now. I am not your husband. Like, who do you want me to be? She's like, can you just be my husband right now on this walk? I'm like, okay, cool. We'll set that aside. But if we are in a business discussion and I think that you've done something wrong, you need to be able to take that.
Do you think there's a way to present something as the business partner, but in a husband type of way?
Most of the time, yes. But if it could take me 90 minutes to softly get to the point that I want to make. And if that time is available, then I will do that, right? I will lead you to the conclusion that I want you to draw. But sometimes you got to cut through the noise and like get shit done. And I got to tell you this feedback right now, and we got to move on.
Yeah.
And this is like the benefit. This is why high level athletes are such great hires, is because athletes from childhood are forged in coachability.
Mm-hmm.
When you have a great coach, the win and the loss is clear as day. And a made shot versus a missed shot is clear as day. A good play versus a bad play is clear as day. And athletes just, they learn to not take things so personally in terms of coachability.
Yeah.
And that's all this is about, is like, if I can tell you, you missed your numbers and we need to understand why, like, tell me why.
I think it's a sign of a good business relationship with somebody and a personal, private relationship with somebody is if you don't take things personal.
It has to be rounded out on the other side too, right? Like if I didn't go up to him at the water cooler and like let him know that like, that was tough.
Yeah.
I'm being straight up with you. That was tough, but like, I have your back, right? That's the yin to the yang of the hardness. And that's why I believe, so if yin and yang exists and again, it's a spectrum, there's intensity of everything. I'm intense on all spectrums. I'm intensely competitive. I'm intensely direct. I will make you feel very uncomfortable because I want to win. On the other side of that, I am intensely loving. I'm intensely caring. I will intensely listen to you. And so they complement each other. Mm-hmm. If you're not intense and, you need to just, make a little point here and there, then maybe you don't need to be as loving on the other side. But I have to overcorrect on both sides. And I've really never had anybody accuse me of being a bad.
It's because you're authentic. I think that's the most important thing. No matter which way you present these things to people or present struggles in your relationship or conversations that need to happen, as long as you're coming from an authentic place, that's all that matters.
Yeah. And also like attack the problem, don't attack the person.
Right.
Right.
Don't take things personally and don't get personal.
Don't get personal.
Yeah. When you're bringing up,
that's self-awareness and self-discipline, right? Like usually you can pull back, let the emotions, settle down and revisit and be like, look, what we were really talking about was the problem.
Right.
We didn't talk about you as being flawed or something is wrong with you.
I think that's circling back around to like say in a relationship or a marriage.
Yeah.
I think that's what I had to move past. I was just taking things personally way too much when Casey brings stuff up. It's like, oh, well, you're telling me I'm a problem. You're telling me I'm the one who has to fix this. I have to do this. It's like, no. It's just, I need you to be aware of these things. So then our relationship grows and I know that you can hold space for me. And I'm like, oh, okay. That's completely different.
For me, it was making the transition between you're this and you're that. And that made me fill in the blank.
Yeah.
That's really fucking hard to say. That made me feel like not good enough. I don't ever want to say that because I never want to admit that I don't feel good enough.
Right.
But like that takes all the heat out of this situation. Mm-hmm. Like, hey babe, when you did that actually made me feel really shitty about myself and blah, 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 blah. Mm-hmm. Versus like you're
firing back.
You're a fucking, this is what you always do. Right. That word always is like, it's so silly. When that comes out of my mouth,
it's such a program just response.
Yeah.
Like,
it's
well,
sloppy,
you're always this.
It's lazy. It's reactive.
It's unthoughtful. It's reactive.
It's unthoughtful. Yeah. So, all right. I think we
got to wrap this one up.
We got to wrap up. That was a good one.
That was a good one.
Well, if you liked what we just talked about, give us a like, subscribe, and a comment. We'd love to hear you. We'll see you in the next one.